My name is Janessa, and I'm 43 years old, and I never imagined that my own daughter would turn against me over a string of pearls. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a sunlit house my late husband and I built together 12 years ago. Life here has always been calm, filled with the gentle rhythm of the ocean breeze and the scent of jasmine from the porch. For the most part, my days are ordinary. I work from home as a jewelry designer, crafting delicate pieces for local boutiques. But among all the pieces I've ever made or owned, there's one that's always stood apart: my mother's pearls. They were passed down to me after she passed away, a perfect, luminous strand that seemed to hold her spirit within each bead. They weren't just jewelry, they were a story, a memory, a connection between generations of women in our family. My mother used to tell me, "Janessa, pearls are made through pressure and pain, just like women." I never forgot those words. I wore them only on special occasions: my wedding day, my daughter's christening, and my mother's funeral. To me, they symbolized love, endurance, and grace. But to my daughter Brielle, they were simply expensive. Brielle is 21 now, bright, ambitious, beautiful, but she's been different lately. Ever since she started dating Mason, a smooth-talking real estate investor who's nearly 10 years older than her, something inside her has shifted. She's become materialistic, always chasing appearances. Our relationship, once close and filled with laughter, has turned cold and strained. It started small. She'd make subtle remarks about my clothes, my age, or how I didn't understand modern success. I brushed it off as youthful arrogance, believing she'd grow out of it. But then, one evening, she stood in the doorway of my studio, eyes sparkling with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen in months. "Mom," she said, "Mason's taking me to a gala next week. It's super formal, and I want to wear the pearls. Just for one night." I looked up from my desk, my hands instinctively reaching to touch my neck, where I imagined those pearls resting. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "those pearls are very special. They're fragile and they belong to your grandmother. I can't risk anything happening to them." She frowned. "It's just jewelry, Mom. You act like it's some sacred relic." I tried to explain that they meant more than their appearance, but she wasn't listening. Her voice rose, sharp and impatient. "You never trust me with anything. You're always hoarding things from your past like you're the only one who matters." Her words stung more than I expected. I told her calmly that it wasn't about trust, it was about respect. But she wouldn't hear it. She slammed her hand on my work table, scattering the beads I'd been stringing, and stormed off to her room. The house fell silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. I sat there for a long time, staring at the scattered beads, feeling something inside me crack. Later that night, I stood outside her bedroom door, debating whether to apologize, even though I'd done nothing wrong. I heard her on the phone with Mason, her voice hushed but furious. "She's impossible," she said. "It's just pearls, Mason. She doesn't even wear them. Maybe I'll just take them, she won't notice." My breath caught in my throat. I stepped away quietly, my heart pounding. Surely, she didn't mean it. Surely my own daughter wouldn't. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She smiled, made coffee, and chatted about her plans for the week. But something in her tone felt rehearsed. I noticed how she avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned my jewelry or my studio. I wanted to believe her innocence, but unease settled heavy in my chest. That evening, I went to bed early, still troubled by her words. Around midnight, I woke to the faint creak of the floorboards outside my room. My heart raced, but I didn't move. I listened slow, deliberate footsteps near my dresser. I thought maybe it was just the house settling, or maybe Brielle looking for something. But deep down, I knew. When the footsteps stopped, I opened my eyes to see the shadow of her figure at my door, faintly illuminated by the hall light. Her hand rested on the doorknob. "Brielle?" I whispered. She froze but didn't answer. Then, in the softest, most chilling voice I'd ever heard from her, she said, "If you won't give them to me, maybe you don't deserve them at all." The door closed quietly behind her. I lay there in the dark, the weight of those words pressing down on me. Something had broken between us that night, not just trust, but something deeper. Something sacred. And I didn't yet know that her words would be the spark that set off a chain of events neither of us could ever undo. The next morning, my jewelry box was open and the pearls were gone. I stood frozen at the foot of my dresser, staring at the empty velvet slot where my mother's pearls had always rested. The morning sun cut through the blinds, landing right on the space where they should have been, almost mocking me. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I told myself I must have moved them, maybe I'd taken them out the night before and forgotten. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't true. My hands trembled as I lifted the jewelry box, checking every compartment, even the small drawer beneath it. Nothing. The strand, the clasp, the familiar cool weight of them, they were all gone. I called out, "Brielle?" My voice cracked as I tried to steady my breathing. She appeared in the doorway, half-dressed, holding her phone in one hand, mascara wand in the other. "What's wrong?" she asked, feigning confusion. "My pearls?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They're missing." Her brow furrowed with practiced innocence that made my stomach twist. "Maybe you misplaced them?" I shook my head. "They've been in this box since the last time I wore them, you know that." She shrugged and went back to her mirror. "Maybe you just forgot. You've been working late lately, right?" I watched her carefully. Her reflection met mine in the mirror for just a second before she looked away too quickly. My pulse quickened. I wanted to believe her, but her tone, the slight lift at the end of her sentences, sounded rehearsed. My heart sank as I noticed something small on her vanity table, a faint shimmer of white dust. I leaned closer when she stepped out of the room. It wasn't makeup, it was pearl dust. My mother's pearls had been real, natural, not coated. That meant something had damaged them. My throat tightened. When Brielle returned, I asked her again, softly this time. "Sweetheart, are you sure you haven't seen them?" She rolled her eyes. "Mom," I said, "no. Why are you accusing me? You always think I'm lying." "I didn't say that," I murmured, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I heard you last night. You were talking about the pearls." Her face went pale. "You were eavesdropping?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to, but I heard what you said." She crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "Then you heard wrong. Mason and I were just joking around. You're being paranoid." Her words stung, but it was her eyes that betrayed her, shifting, restless, refusing to meet mine. Just then, her phone rang. Mason's name flashed across the screen. She snatched it up and rushed to the porch, closing the door behind her. My hands clenched into fists. I followed quietly, standing by the window where the curtains were slightly parted. Her voice was low, urgent. "No, I didn't tell her," she said. "Yes, I have it handled. She won't find out." My stomach dropped. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want. I backed away before she noticed me. For a few moments, I just stood there in the silence of the house, feeling the weight of betrayal crush my chest. When she came back inside, she acted like nothing had happened. "I'm going out with Mason," she said breezily, grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up." I watched her walk out, the door clicking shut behind her, and my eyes welled up. Anger burned through the sadness. How could she? How could my own daughter take something that symbolized everything my mother had left behind? I needed to be sure before confronting her again. So I spent the afternoon quietly driving to a few local pawn shops. I showed each owner a photo of the pearls, my voice trembling as I asked if anyone had brought them in recently. Each time, I got the same answer, no. But in one shop downtown, the owner gave me a look that made my heart race. He hesitated before saying, "You might want to check the new auction listings online, ma'am. People move stuff quick these days." When I got home, I checked every auction site I could find, scrolling for hours until my eyes blurred. No pearls, no trace. But the dread in my stomach didn't fade. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about possession. It was about what the pearls meant: family, history, my mother's legacy. I realized then that this wasn't just about a theft, it was about something breaking between us that might never heal. That night, I sat in my studio, surrounded by my tools and half-finished pieces, but I couldn't focus. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with my mother, in the hospital. Her hand was weak in mine, but her voice had been steady when she said, "Guard what carries our story, Janessa. Not just its worth, but its soul." Now those words echoed in my head like a haunting. Hours passed before I heard the sound of the front door. Brielle came home, humming softly, pretending everything was normal. She didn't see me sitting in the dark corner of the stained living room. I watched her move through the hallway, her posture relaxed, her phone glowing in her hand. There was a kind of carelessness about her that I'd never seen before, like she had no idea what she'd truly done. I whispered to myself, if she wants to treat legacy like currency, I'll show her its real value. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. A quiet, unshakable decision was forming inside me. I went upstairs, opened my mother's old jewelry case, and looked at the empty space where the pearls once were. The faint outline of where they had rested seemed to glow in the moonlight, as if accusing me for failing to protect them. I closed the box gently, holding it against my chest. I didn't know then that my decision would end up making national news. Brielle came home wearing a designer dress I knew she couldn't afford. It was a shimmering gold evening gown, the kind you only see in magazines, tailored, perfect, and dripping with quiet arrogance. I stood by the doorway, pretending to tidy up the entry table as she twirled in front of the mirror, admiring herself. "Mason bought it for me," she said casually, noticing my raised eyebrows. "He said I deserved to look like the woman I'm meant to be." Her words hit me like a slap. The woman she was meant to be? I thought of the girl who used to curl up beside me, helping me string beads and asking me about her grandmother's stories. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who measured worth in dollars and diamonds. I forced a smile, though my chest tightened. "It's beautiful," I said quietly. But my voice betrayed my unease. She beamed, oblivious. "Oh, and Mason's taking me to a fundraiser this weekend. Everyone will be there, the mayor, influencers, real estate people. It's a big deal." "That sounds fancy," I replied. "But it must be exhausting trying to keep up with people like that." She shrugged. "That's the world, Mom. You have to look this part if you want to be taken seriously." That night, as I cleared the dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had changed beyond recognition. Her laughter had a hollow ring to it now, her kindness replaced by ambition. It wasn't entirely her fault Mason had fed her that hunger for status. He flaunted wealth like it was a form of control, and Brielle had fallen right into his orbit. A few days later, while working in my studio, I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone. "People don't care about meaning or history," she said. "They care about presentation. You could have a piece of junk, and if it's displayed right, people will pay thousands for it." Those words made something inside me twist painfully. She wasn't just dismissing my beliefs, she was mocking everything my mother had taught me. That evening at dinner, I tried to talk to her again, to remind her who she used to be. "Brielle," I said softly, "when did you start thinking that everything has to be about money or image? Not everything worth something can be sold." She sighed, exasperated. "Mom, this isn't about greed. It's about reality. You can't cling to the past forever. People like Mason, people who get things done, they understand that." I wanted to argue, but I could see the stubbornness in her eyes. She wasn't listening. So I said nothing. Later, as she scrolled through her phone, she mentioned something offhandedly that caught my attention. "There's this exhibit downtown," she said. "It's all about people donating family heirlooms to the art museum. Apparently, it's super trendy. Some people even get written up in magazines for it." I froze for a moment, staring at her. "You mean people are giving away family treasures just for attention?" She shrugged. "It's called legacy branding, Mom. It's elegant." I smiled sadly. "Elegant," she said, as if generosity needed a camera to validate it. I sat in my studio for hours, surrounded by half-finished necklaces and loose gemstones. I opened a small wooden box that had belonged to my mother. Inside, I found her old letter again, the one she'd written before she passed. The paper had yellowed, but her handwriting was still strong, graceful. I read the words I'd memorized long ago. A woman's worth isn't in what she owns, but in what she protects. Some things are meant to outlive us. Guard them, Janessa, not from others, but from forgetfulness. Tears blurred the ink as I realized what I had to do. I couldn't let Betrayal or Mason reduce my mother's legacy to a commodity. If Betrayal wanted to treat history like a fashion statement, then I needed to show her what legacy truly meant. The next morning I walked into her room. The gold dress hung over her chair, and perfume lingered in the air. I looked at her sleeping peacefully, her face soft in the morning light, and my heart ached. I remembered when she was little, how she'd play with my jewelry and say, "When I grow up, I want to be just like you, Mom." Now she wanted to be like Mason. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, I spent the rest of the day in quiet thought. I cleaned the pearl's empty case and lined it with a new piece of velvet. I pulled out my camera and took photos of the old letters, the jewelry designs, the family portraits that told the story of our lineage. For the first time in years, I saw the full picture of what those pearls represented, not just beauty, but strength, perseverance, and identity. As I set the pearl's empty box on the table, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I wouldn't punish her. I wouldn't lecture her. I would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. That evening, my friend Tasha came over for tea. She listened quietly as I told her everything Betrayal's demands, the theft, the guilt that followed. Tasha looked at me, thoughtfully, and said, "Janessa, if she won't value their meaning, maybe you should make them mean something to the world instead. Do something bold. Something she'll remember." Her words lit a spark in me. A statement she couldn't ignore. A gesture so powerful that Betrayal would finally understand that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you respect. I stood by the window that night, watching the moonlight spill across my studio floor. My mother's photo sat on the workbench beside the empty jewelry case. I placed my hand on the frame and whispered, "I know what I have to do now. If my daughter saw my pearls as just objects, then I'd make them untouchable forever." I called the Savannah History Museum the next morning. My voice shook a little when I asked to speak with someone about a possible donation. The receptionist connected me to a woman named Miss Armitage, the museum's curator. She had the kind of calm, professional tone that immediately put me at ease. "You're welcome to bring the piece in for evaluation," she said. "We're always honored to showcase local family histories, especially those that reflect Southern women's legacies." Her words struck a chord. A legacy. That's exactly what this was about. I hung up and stood in my studio for a long moment, my heart pounding with both fear and relief. The decision felt right but heavy. Donating my mother's pearls would mean never feeling their cool touch against my skin again, but it would also mean no one, not even Betrayal, could misuse them. They would belong to history, where greed couldn't reach. I went to my safe and carefully removed the pearls. As I laid them across my palm, I noticed something that made my chest tighten, a small chip near one of the center beads. It wasn't visible at first glance, but I knew every curve and sheen of that necklace by heart. The damage confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Betrayal had worn them. I let out a shaky breath, a strange mixture of anger and sorrow coursing through me. Still, I couldn't let that stop me. I took a soft cloth and began gently cleaning them, whispering my mother's name as if she could hear me. "I'm doing this for you," I murmured. "For us." When I finished, I placed the pearls in their velvet pouch and tied the satin string around it with trembling fingers. Driving to the museum felt surreal. Savannah's streets were bathed in morning light, lined with moss-draped oaks that swayed like they were nodding in quiet approval. I parked in front of the museum and sat for a minute, gripping the pouch in my lap. The building loomed ahead, dignified and timeless, just like the women whose stories it held. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Miss Armitage greeted me at the reception area. She was in her 50s, graceful, with silver streaks in her hair and an understanding smile. "You must be Janessa," she said warmly. "You mentioned something very special on the phone." I nodded and handed her the pouch. "These belong to my mother," I explained. "She always said they represented the women in our family, their strength, their sacrifices. I can't think of a better place for them than here." Miss Armitage untied the pouch and carefully lifted the pearls into the light. Her eyes widened slightly. "They're exquisite," she said softly. "And you're right, they deserve to be seen, not hidden away. Would you be willing to share your family's story to accompany the display?" I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Yes," I whispered. "That's exactly why I came." She led me to her office where we filled out the paperwork. As I signed the final line, a strange calm washed over me. It felt as if I'd finally fulfilled a duty, one that transcended ownership. These pearls were never truly mine to keep. They belonged to the generations of women who had come before me, and now they'd belong to everyone who needed to see what endurance looked like. When Miss Armitage shook my hand, she said, "Your mother would be proud. Not everyone has the courage to part with something so meaningful." I smiled faintly. "It's not loss," I said. "It's preservation." Walking through the exhibit hall afterward, I felt a deep peace. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, glinting off glass cases that held stories, rings from war widows, diaries from suffragettes, portraits of forgotten mothers. Soon, my mother's pearls would join them. They'd no longer be a secret held in a jewelry box, they'd become part of history's heartbeat. For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. It felt like forgiveness, though I wasn't sure for whom. Maybe for Brielle, maybe for myself. As I stepped outside into the afternoon sun, I took out my phone and saw a string of missed calls from Brielle. My stomach knotted, but I didn't answer. I needed time to let the calm settle in my heart before facing her storm. I stopped by a small cafe near the museum and ordered tea. I sat by the window, watching people pass, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I didn't feel defined by what I owned or guarded. I felt defined by what I'd let go of. But that peace didn't last long. As I reached for my purse, I caught a glimpse of someone walking quickly across the museum courtyard, a familiar silhouette. My blood ran cold. Brielle. Her hair glimmered in the sunlight, and her stride was purposeful. She was heading straight for the museum entrance, her face twisted with anger. I froze. She must have found out. Maybe she saw the donation post or overheard one of my calls. I hadn't expected her to find out this soon. Through the glass, I watched as she stopped at the museum doors, her phone pressed to her ear, her jaw tight with fury. She turned her head slightly. And for one fleeting second, her eyes met mine through the cafe window. Her expression was a mix of shock and betrayal. The cup trembled in my hand. My breath caught, heart pounding like a drum. I could already feel the confrontation that was about to erupt, the reckoning neither of us could avoid. What I didn't expect was my daughter showing up at the museum doors that very afternoon. Brielle barges into the museum, mascara smudged, shouting my name. The sharp echo of her heels against the marble floor sliced through the quiet hum of the museum. Heads turned as she stormed past the front desk, ignoring the receptionist's polite but nervous attempts to stop her. My heart dropped into my stomach as I rose from my seat near the entrance to meet her. Her face was flushed with anger, eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed, her voice trembling yet loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Visitors paused by the exhibits, pretending not to stare but clearly intrigued. I motioned for her to lower her voice, but she ignored me and marched closer, her fury radiating off her like heat. "You gave them away?" she snapped. "To a museum? Are you trying to humiliate me?" I stood still, grounding myself before speaking. Brielle, I said softly. They weren't yours to take, and they weren't mine to sell. They belong where people can learn from them. Her lip quivered as she laughed bitterly. Learn from them? What are they supposed to learn, that you value dead people more than your living daughter? The words hit me like a physical blow. I swallowed hard, keeping my tone calm. That's not fair, sweetheart. This isn't about choosing the past over you. It's about preserving what matters. What matters to you? She shot back. You didn't even ask me before doing this. You made me look like a thief, like some spoiled brat who doesn't care about family. I glanced around, noticing museum patrons whispering. Let's go, somewhere private, I said quietly, gesturing toward the far side of the exhibit hall. She hesitated, her breathing ragged, then followed. As we walked past the glass cases, the glint of history shimmered around us: old lockets, faded photographs, stories etched into plaques. I could feel the irony. Here we were, two women becoming part of another kind of story, one written in anger and pain. We stopped near a display under construction, the spot where my mother's pearls would soon rest. The sight of the empty stand made my chest tighten. This is where they'll be displayed, I said softly. They'll have your grandmother's story beside them. Her strength deserves to be remembered. Brielle's voice cracked. And what about me, Mom? Don't I deserve to be remembered? You didn't even give me a chance to make it right. I turned to face her fully. You had your chance when you took them, I said. My tone steady but my heart breaking. You broke my trust, Brielle. You made something sacred feel cheap. She blinked rapidly, anger giving way to desperation. I just wanted to wear them, Mom. Mason said they'd look perfect with my dress. I wasn't going to sell them. I frowned. Then why did you lie? Why did you sneak around and hide what you'd done? Her voice faltered. Because I knew you'd say no. You always do. The silence between us felt heavy. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then her phone buzzed. And when she saw the name on the screen, she froze, Mason. She pressed the button to silence it, but not before I caught a glimpse of the text preview. Did you get them back yet? My stomach twisted. I met her eyes. He knew about the pearls? Her lips trembled. Mom, it's not what you think. Then what is it, Brielle? I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. Did he tell you to take them? Did he promise you something in return? She looked down, tears spilling onto her cheeks. He said we could use them as collateral for an investment he was making. He said it was temporary, that I'd get them right back. My body went cold. Collateral? I whispered. For what, his ego? She covered her face with her hands, sobbing now. I didn't know what else to do. He made it sound like it would make us both money. He said it would make you proud. Proud? I repeated, disbelief surging through me. Brielle, I would rather live in a cardboard box than see my mother's legacy sold for profit. The sound of footsteps interrupted us. Miss Armitage appeared at the end of the corridor, her expression cautious. Is everything all right here? She asked gently. I forced a smile. Just a family matter, I said, my voice tight. We're fine. But Brielle wasn't fine. She was trembling, shoulders shaking as she whispered, I didn't mean to ruin everything. Miss Armitage hesitated, then nodded and excused herself, giving us space. I turned back to Brielle and placed my hand on her arm. Listen to me, I said softly. You made a mistake, but what matters now is that you understand why this hurts so much. She looked up at me, her eyes raw with guilt. I thought Mason loved me, she said in a broken voice. I thought he was helping us. I didn't realize he was using me. I sighed, my anger dissolving into sorrow. You wanted to feel important. I get that, but he saw that need and exploited it. She wiped her tears, her voice trembling. So that's it? You're just giving up on me? No, I said gently. I'm not giving up on you. But I can't fix this for you either. You have to face what you've done and learn from it. She nodded weakly, biting her lip. For the first time, I saw the scared little girl she used to be, the one who used to run to me when she broke a toy or scraped her knee. I wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But before I could take a step, a low, familiar voice echoed through the hall. "Well," it drawled, mocking and smooth. "Isn't this a touching scene?" We both turned toward the entrance. Mason stood there, dressed in his usual expensive suit, his smirk dripping with arrogance. His presence filled the room like poison. But before I could say anything, Mason walked into the museum, smirking. Mason's arrogance filled the museum hall like poison. He strolled toward us with that infuriating smirk, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the marble floor. Even in the soft museum light, his confidence seemed artificial, too glossy, too rehearsed. "Janessa," he said smoothly, as if greeting an old friend instead of the woman whose family legacy he'd tried to exploit. "I heard about your little donation. Quite the publicity stunt." Brielle flinched beside me. "Mason, please don't start." He ignored her, eyes locked on me. "You gave away a necklace worth 6 figures, and for what? Sentiment?" He chuckled, low and bitter. "You could have sold it, invested it, tripled its worth. Instead, you handed it over to a building full of dust." I met his gaze, my anger burning steady but cold. "Those pearls weren't yours. They were never for sale." His smirk widened. "Everything's for sale, Janessa. That's what people like you never understand. You sit around clinging to old trinkets while the rest of us build empires." I took a deep breath, refusing to let him see me break. Empires built on manipulation don't last. Brielle stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mason, stop! You promised me." He turned on her, his tone suddenly sharp. "I promised you what? That I'd help you look important? That's what you wanted, wasn't it? To show off Mommy's pearls and prove you weren't just another spoiled little girl from Savannah?" Her face drained of color. "That's not fair." "Fair?" He sneered. "You dragged me into this mess. You said you could get them easily. You swore she'd never notice." My heart clenched hearing that confirmation aloud. Every suspicion, every ache, every sleepless night, it all came crashing down in that single sentence. I turned to Brielle, who looked utterly destroyed. "Is that true?" I whispered. Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to help him, Mom. He said it would make you proud." Mason laughed again. Cruel and mocking. "Proud? Of what? Your mother doesn't care about success. She'd rather drown in nostalgia than make a real mark on the world." Something inside me snapped. I took a slow step toward him, keeping my voice low but firm. "You don't know me. You don't know my family. Those pearls carry more history than you could comprehend in 10 lifetimes." He rolled his eyes. "History doesn't pay bills." "No," I said softly. "But it teaches us who we are. And you. Mason, you have no idea who you are without your money." His expression hardened. For the first time, the arrogance faltered, replaced by a flash of anger. "You think you're better than me? You think a few dead relatives make you special?" "Special?" I repeated, my tone turning sharp. "No. Just aware. There's a difference." Brielle stepped between us, sobbing. "Stop it. Both of you!" she cried. "This isn't helping." I looked at her, my heart breaking. She was shaking, torn between two worlds, mine, built on meaning, and his, built on deceit. She turned to Mason, her voice barely audible. "You used me, didn't you?" He smirked again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "You used yourself, sweetheart. I just gave you the stage." Before I could react, Miss Armitage appeared at the far end of the hall, accompanied by 2 museum security guards. Her calm expression masked quiet alarm. "Is everything all right here?" she asked evenly. Mason gave her a wide, charming smile. "Everything's fine, ma'am. Just a family disagreement." But she didn't buy it. Her eyes flicked to Brielle's tear-streaked face, then to me. Perhaps it's best you all take this conversation outside, she said firmly. Mason turned toward the exit, adjusting his cufflinks with exaggerated nonchalance. Don't worry, he said over his shoulder. I'm leaving, but I'll be back when you realize you made a mistake. I crossed my arms. The only mistake was ever letting you near my daughter. The guards moved closer, subtly positioning themselves between him and us. He gave a final mocking laugh. Keep your trinkets, Janessa. They're just rocks for rich women with guilt. Then he sauntered out, his reflection briefly warping across the glass of the museum doors before disappearing into the bright afternoon light. For a long moment, the silence that followed felt unbearable. The museum's air conditioning hummed faintly, the only sound between us. Brielle sank to the bench behind her, face buried in her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I was stupid. I didn't see what he was doing. I sat beside her, my anger cooling into something quieter grief. You wanted to be loved, I said softly. That's not stupid, it's human. But you can't let love make you blind to manipulation. She looked up at me. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. Can you ever forgive me? I hesitated. The mother in me wanted to say yes, to wrap her in my arms and erase the hurt, but the truth was still too raw. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Forgiveness takes time, trust takes longer. She nodded, crying harder. I'll earn it. I promise. I took her hand, feeling her fingers tremble in mine. Start by forgiving yourself first, I whispered. That's the only way you'll learn from this. We sat in silence, two broken women trying to find our way back to each other. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. I didn't answer, but something about it made my skin crawl. I set the phone face down on the bench, pushing the thought aside. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the fragile thread connecting me to my daughter again. But forgiveness wasn't something I could give her yet, not while her apology still depended on consequences. For days, Brielle avoided me. The house that once felt warm and alive now echoed with silence. She stayed mostly in her room, her music low, her laughter gone. Every time I passed her door, I wanted to knock, to talk, to bridge the widening gap between us, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, maybe exhaustion. Or maybe I was just afraid of saying the wrong thing again. The betrayal still hung in the air, like a scent that wouldn't fade. In the mornings, I'd make coffee and see her cup sitting unused on the counter, a small reminder of how fractured things had become. Sometimes she'd leave for class or to see friends, and I'd hear the front door close softly behind her, followed by the hollow quiet that always followed. It took 3 days before she finally spoke to me again. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through bills when she appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were puffy, her hair pulled into a messy bun. Mom, she said, voice trembling, I ended things with Mason. I looked up slowly, unsure whether to believe her at first. You did? She nodded, tears already forming. He called me yesterday, demanding I ask you to get the pearls back. When I told him they're at the museum, he lost it. That's when I realized he never loved me. He just wanted what wasn't his. The words hit me with both sadness and relief. You did the right thing, Brielle, I said softly. She sat down across from me, resting her head in her hands. I feel so stupid. How could I not see what he was doing? You were young, I said gently, and love, especially the kind that flatters, can make anyone blind. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that's fragile but healing. For the first time since everything happened, I saw a flicker of the girl I used to know, the one who'd sit beside me stringing beads, the one who valued meaning over money. In the days that followed, life slowly began to find rhythm again. I went back to work in my studio, and Brielle began helping me with small things, organizing materials, photographing my jewelry for my website. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then, something unexpected happened. The museum called. Miss Armitage wanted to let me know that my donation had drawn attention from the local newspaper. Your story touched people, she said. We'd love to feature you in an article about preserving family legacies. At first, I hesitated. The idea of turning something so personal into a public story felt uncomfortable. But then I thought about my mother, about her words, and how she always believed in sharing lessons rather than hiding them. Maybe this was my way of passing hers on. When the reporter came to interview me, she was young, about Brielle's age, and surprisingly empathetic. She asked gentle questions about my mother, about the pearls, and about why I'd chosen to give them away. I told her the truth. That legacy isn't about ownership, it's about respect. That sometimes, letting go is the only way to honor what truly matters. The article was published 2 days later. The headline read, "A Mother's Legacy, Savannah Woman Donates Family Heirloom to Preserve History." My phone lit up with messages from neighbors, old clients, even strangers who said the story had moved them. It spread across social media, shared thousands of times. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel ashamed or angry, I felt proud. Brielle read the article in silence that night. She sat across from me at the table, her eyes glistening as she scrolled through the comments. "Everyone's calling you inspiring," she said softly. "They don't even know half of it." I smiled faintly. "Maybe they don't need to. Some stories are meant to stay between family." She nodded, wiping a tear. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Her words, simple as they were, filled the hollow ache in my chest. The following week, Miss Armitage invited us both to a private preview of the exhibit. The pearls would be officially displayed under a glass case with a small inscription beside them. "The Ellsworth Pearls, a testament to strength, endurance, and legacy." When we arrived, the museum was quiet, the air carrying that faint blend of history and reverence. Brielle walked beside me, her steps tentative. When we reached the exhibit, we both stopped. The pearls glimmered softly under the light, resting on a black velvet cushion. They looked timeless, untouched by our chaos. Brielle's voice broke the silence. "They're even more beautiful than I remembered." "They always were," I said quietly. "You just couldn't see it before." She turned to me, her voice trembling. "Do you hate me for what I did?" I shook my head. "No. I was hurt, but I don't hate you. Hate has no place between a mother and her daughter. But trust. Trust is something we'll have to rebuild together." She nodded, her eyes glassy. "I'll earn it, I promise." We stood there in silence, side by side, watching the pearls gleam beneath the glass. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift between us, a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of pain and growth. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Can I see them one last time?" I hesitated, my first instinct to protect. But then I saw the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't asking out of greed or entitlement this time, she was asking out of reverence. I nodded slowly. "All right, tomorrow. I'll take you." She smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt peace for the first time since this all began. Maybe this was how healing started, not with apologies, but with understanding. When she whispers, "Can I see them one last time?" I hesitate but agree to take her to the exhibit. We arrive at the museum, hand in hand yet worlds apart. The morning sun filters through the grand arched windows of the Savannah History Museum, painting long golden streaks across the marble floor. I can hear Brielle's soft breathing beside me as we walk in. There's a nervous tremor in her steps, like she's approaching something sacred. I suppose in a way, she is. The air feels heavier here today, quiet, reverent, as though even the walls understand the gravity of what's about to unfold. We walk down the familiar corridor lined with glass cases that hold the stories of other families' letters from soldiers, wedding rings, faded portraits. Each one whispers of lives lived with meaning. I glance at Brielle and wonder what kind of story she and I will leave behind when our time passes. When we reach the exhibit, my breath catches. The pearls glimmer softly under the delicate lighting, resting on their black velvet cushion behind pristine glass. They look untouched, immortal. Seeing them displayed like this still tugs at something deep inside me, a mixture of pride and ache. The inscription plate beside them reads, "The Ellsworth Pearls, a legacy of strength, forgiveness, and endurance." The museum must have added that last word after hearing my interview. Brielle steps closer, her reflection merging with the glass. Her lips part as though she's seeing them for the first time. "They're beautiful," she whispers. "They always were," I say gently. "But they were never about beauty. They were about what it took to create them." She turns to me, confused. I nod toward the display. "Do you remember what I used to tell you about pearls?" She hesitates, then nods. "That they're made through pain." "Yes," I say softly. "An oyster gets hurt, it gets a grain of sand trapped inside. Instead of rejecting it, it wraps it in layers. Again and again. Until the pain becomes something beautiful. That's what these pearls represent. That's what our family has done for generations. We turned pain into legacy." Tears well in her eyes. She presses her fingertips lightly against the glass, her reflection shimmering over the pearls. "I didn't understand before," she says quietly. "I thought they were just jewelry. I didn't realize they were a piece of you. Of Grandma. Of everything." I nod, swallowing the lump in my throat. Sometimes we don't see the value of something until we almost lose it. She wipes a tear from her cheek. "I was so stupid. Mason made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I had to prove something to him." I step closer and place a hand on her shoulder. "You don't ever have to prove your worth to anyone, Brielle. You were born enough. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Her sobs come quietly then, shaking her frame. I pull her into my arms, and for the first time in what feels like forever, she lets herself be held. She clings to me, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'll never take anything for granted again. I swear." I press a kiss to her forehead. "I believe you," I say softly, "and I forgive you." For a moment, the museum around us disappears. It's just the two of us, mother and daughter, standing at the intersection of memory and redemption. The sound of tourists murmuring fades to nothing. The cool air feels alive with something sacred, something that binds us again. A soft voice interrupts the quiet. "Would you like a picture?" It's one of the museum photographers, holding a small digital camera. I glance at Brielle, who nods shyly. We pose beside the display, our hands intertwined, the pearls glowing between us in the background. The photographer snaps the photo, smiles politely, and walks away. I don't know it yet, but that image will later appear in a local magazine, a mother and daughter standing before a legacy made visible. As we turn to leave, I feel lighter. For the first time in months, I believe we might actually heal from all this. The pearls have done their work, they've taught us both what real value means. But as we reach the lobby, something catches my attention. Near the entrance, a man stands watching us. He's well dressed, with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes. There's something unsettlingly familiar about him, though I can't place it. He's pretending to study a brochure, but his gaze keeps flicking toward me and Brielle. I slow my pace, instinctively protective. "Do you know him?" I whisper to Brielle. She glances over her shoulder, her brow furrowing. "No. But he's been here since we arrived. I noticed him by the front desk earlier. We step outside, but I can still feel his eyes on us through the glass doors. My heartbeat quickens. The air suddenly feels colder. Brielle senses it too, her grip on my hand tightens. "Mom," she says nervously, "do you think he's one of Mason's friends?" "I don't know," I reply, my voice quiet but steady. "But we'll be careful." We start walking toward the car, the crunch of gravel beneath our shoes echoing in the stillness. I glance back once more, and there he is, standing by the museum entrance, phone pressed to his ear, his eyes following us until we disappear around the corner. That night, after Brielle goes to bed, I can't shake the image of his face. I sit by my studio window, the city lights flickering in the distance, and think about how fragile peace can be. Just when I thought the storm had finally passed, a new shadow seems to be forming. I whisper into the quiet room, "Who are you?" But the night gives no answer, just the hum of the cicadas outside and the faint echo of my mother's words in my heart. When we walk out, I notice a stranger watching us closely from the lobby, someone with an unsettling familiarity. The stranger introduces himself as Everett Hale, an antique dealer from Charleston. At least, that's what his card said when he approached me the following morning. I was in my studio, sketching a new jewelry design, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. And when I opened the door, there he stood, polite smile, pressed gray suit, eyes sharp as glass. "Mrs. Ellsworth?" he asked smoothly. "I hope I'm not intruding. My name's Everett Hale. I'm an antique specialist, and I believe we have a shared appreciation for family heirlooms." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. I forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale, but I'm not interested in selling anything." He chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm not here to buy. I was actually at the museum yesterday and noticed your family's pearls on display. Remarkable craftsmanship. I was hoping to speak with you about their provenance." I hesitated. His tone was professional, but there was something too smooth about it, too rehearsed. "The museum has all the documentation," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "They'd be better equipped to answer questions like that." He nodded thoughtfully. "Of course. It's just that pieces like those don't surface often. I specialize in tracing such items through history. I was hoping you might share a few family details. Strictly academic, I assure you." There it was again, that probing curiosity that didn't sound quite scholarly. I stepped slightly forward, blocking his view of my home. "I appreciate your interest, but my mother's story and her pearls are in good hands. The museum doesn't need additional verification." For a brief second, the polite mask slipped. His eyes hardened, just a flicker, but enough to send a chill through me. Then he smiled again, all charm. "Of course, I didn't mean to overstep. It's just a shame when history gets locked away behind glass, don't you think?" "No," I said simply. "I think it's safer that way." He nodded, handed me his card, and left. But the unease stayed long after the sound of his footsteps faded. I turned the card over in my hand, reading the embossed print. "Everett Hale Antiques and Estate Restoration, Charleston, SC." Something about it didn't sit right. Later that afternoon, I called Miss Armitage. When I mentioned his name, her tone grew serious. "Yes, I've seen him here a few times recently," she said. "He's been asking about other high-value donations too, heirlooms, jewelry, historical artifacts. He's persistent." "Do you think he's legitimate?" I asked. She sighed. "We've done some checking. His credentials are vague. He's been under quiet observation by museum security, but nothing concrete yet." That night, I told Brielle everything. She frowned, clearly unsettled. "Mom, what if he's working for Mason?" The idea made my stomach drop. "Why would you think that?" She bit her lip. "Because Mason once mentioned a guy in Charleston who deals in rare collections. He said he could move anything fast." I didn't think much of it then. I rubbed my temples, a sick feeling rising in my chest. "We need to be careful. If he's connected to Mason, he might be trying to get the pearls." "But they're in the museum," she said quickly. "He can't just take them." "Maybe not legally," I murmured. "But people like him, they find ways." The next day, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with words typed in bold, uneven font. "Those pearls belong in my hands, not behind glass." My blood ran cold. I showed it to Brielle, whose face went pale. "Mom, this is serious. We should call the police." "I will," I said, but my voice shook. "First, I need to let Miss Armitage know." We drove to the museum together that afternoon. When I showed Miss Armitage the note, she pursed her lips. "We'll alert security and notify the authorities," she assured me. "Don't engage with him further. We'll make sure the pearls are closely monitored." Brielle hovered close to me, her anxiety visible. I squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay," I said quietly, though part of me wasn't sure I believed it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me sit up in bed. Around midnight, I looked out the window and thought I saw a car idling down the street. its headlights dimmed. When I blinked, it was gone. Maybe my nerves were playing tricks on me, but maybe not. Over the next few days, Everett seemed to linger in the background of our lives. Brielle saw him near her campus parking lot once, or at least someone who looked like him. Another day, I spotted a man matching his description across from the museum entrance. Whether it was coincidence or something more, the paranoia began eating away at me. Brielle grew quieter again, guilt shadowing her face. One evening, she whispered, "This is my fault. If I hadn't gotten mixed up with Mason, none of this would be happening." I took her hand, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart. Mason and people like him prey on trust. They twist it until it breaks. But we're not powerless. We'll protect what's ours this time." That's when I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to let another manipulative man threaten what my mother left behind. The museum had security, but I needed certainty. The next morning, I drove back to the museum and requested a private meeting with the director. As I explained everything: Mason's manipulation, Everett's visit, the anonymous note, the director listened intently, his brow furrowed. "If he's who we think he is," he said finally, "then this might be part of a larger pattern. Several museums in the region have reported attempted thefts of heirlooms tied to private donors." My heart pounded. "What can we do?" He leaned forward. "We set a trap. Quietly. If he's bold enough to try again, we'll catch him in the act." I left the museum that day with a strange combination of fear and resolve. I'd been afraid of losing love, legacy, control, but now my fear had turned to focus. That night, as Brielle and I locked up the house, I could feel the shift in both of us. We weren't running anymore. We were ready to stand our ground. The next day, I arrange a plan with the museum's director to expose whoever is behind this scheme. We install a discreet camera near the pearl display. It felt strange to stand in that quiet museum hall knowing that, beneath all its elegance, a trap was waiting to be sprung. The museum's director, Armitage, and a pair of uniformed security officers handled everything with calm professionalism. I signed a confidentiality agreement that allowed them to monitor the exhibit after hours, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the situation settle fully on my shoulders. This wasn't just about jewelry anymore, it was about catching whoever had been lurking in the shadows of our peace. The security team explained the plan in simple terms. "We'll rotate staff, add hidden motion sensors, and place a camera inside the lighting fixture above the pearls," one officer said. "If Mr. Hale or anyone else tries to tamper with the display, we'll have it on record." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. "I don't want this turning into a public scandal. It's about protecting history, not making headlines." Miss Armitage smiled faintly. "You have my word. Discretion is our specialty." When I returned home that evening, Brielle was already waiting on the porch. She'd been on edge ever since the note appeared, and her eyes looked tired from lack of sleep. "Did they take you seriously?" she asked. "They did," I said, sitting beside her. "The museum's taking extra precautions. They're installing cameras, alarms, everything." She exhaled with relief. "Good. I hate that this is happening because of me." I placed my hand over hers. "What matters now is that we're handling it together. You're not alone in this anymore." The following days felt long and tense. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected bad news. I visited the museum daily under the pretense of checking on the exhibit, but really, I just needed reassurance. Each time I saw the pearls still safe beneath the glass, I breathed easier. Brielle insisted on joining me. "I need to face this," she said firmly one morning. "I was part of the problem before. Now I want to help protect them." I couldn't have been prouder. Seeing her step up, replacing guilt with courage, was something my mother would have loved to witness. We became regular fixtures in the museum for the next week. The staff got used to seeing us wander through the exhibits, sipping coffee, pretending to admire the art while our eyes always drifted back to the pearls. We noticed Everett a few times too, always at a distance, pretending to study other pieces, pretending not to notice us noticing him. On the fourth evening, something about his movements changed. He lingered longer, his eyes sharper, his posture tenser. I whispered to Brielle, "He's watching the security rotations." Her hand found mine. "Do you think he'll try something tonight?" "I think he's running out of patience," I murmured. That night, the museum stayed open late for a private donor event, a perfect cover for Everett to blend in. The plan was simple. Security would monitor the cameras remotely while plainclothes guards mingled with guests. Brielle and I would act natural, pretending we were simply there to enjoy the evening. I wore one of my mother's old shawls, the one with tiny embroidered seashells, as a quiet homage to her. Brielle wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back neatly. We stood together near the pearls, sipping sparkling water, pretending to chat casually while keeping Everett in our periphery. He arrived about half an hour in, wearing a crisp charcoal suit and that same practiced smile. He greeted a few donors, shook hands, laughed lightly, and then his gaze locked onto the display. Even from across the room, I could feel the shift in his focus. He moved closer, pacing slowly, pretending to admire a neighboring collection. I whispered to Brielle, "Stay calm, don't react." She nodded, her breathing shallow. At one point, he brushed past us deliberately, his voice low and mocking. "Lovely evening," he said, smirking. "You must be proud, Mrs. Ellsworth. Such a shame these pearls are trapped behind glass. They deserve to be worn, not imprisoned." I met his gaze, unflinching. "They're exactly where they belong." His eyes glinted. "We'll see." Then he walked away. The rest of the evening passed slowly. Guests began to leave, the lights dimmed, and security started locking up. Brielle and I slipped out quietly, hearts pounding. I could feel the tension buzzing in the air like static before a storm. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. It was Miss Armitage. Her voice was urgent but steady. "He's here." My pulse spiked. "What?" "The alarms just tripped in Hall B. We're seeing movement near the Pearls case." "Stay home, Janessa. The police are on their way." But of course I didn't stay home. Within 15 minutes, Brielle and I were pulling into the museum parking lot. Red and blue lights painted the facade as officers surrounded the entrance. Miss Armitage met us at the door, her expression grim but triumphant. "He tried to pry open the glass," she said. "The camera caught everything. He disabled one alarm, but not the motion sensor. When the system triggered, he panicked." I stared past her toward the exhibit hall, where 2 police officers were escorting Everett out in handcuffs. His once perfect hair was disheveled, his smug composure replaced by cold fury. When he saw me, his lips curled. "You think this ends with me?" He spat. "You have no idea what you've started." I didn't flinch. "It ends right here," I said quietly. "My mother's legacy isn't for sale." He laughed bitterly as they led him away. "You'll regret this," he muttered before disappearing into the flashing lights. Brielle exhaled shakily beside me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's gone," she whispered. "It's finally over." I pulled her close. "Yes," I said softly. "It's over." But as we stood there, surrounded by the hum of police radios and the fading chaos, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't just relief, it was closure. For my mother, for the pearls, and for us. As they lead him away, I look at Brielle, her eyes no longer naive but resolute. The arrest made headlines statewide. By the next morning, every local news outlet had picked up the story: Savannah Museum foils antique smuggling ring. Mother and daughter help catch notorious thief. It was surreal seeing my name in print, my face in news clips, and the pearls glimmering in the background of every photograph. But this time, the attention didn't feel invasive or shameful. It felt redemptive. Like the universe was acknowledging what my mother's legacy truly stood for: endurance, integrity, and truth. Brielle and I sat side by side on the living room couch, watching the coverage on the evening news. She looked stunned, barely blinking as the reporter praised our courage for alerting the museum and cooperating with authorities. "You're a hero, Mom," she said softly. "You really are." I smiled, faintly, shaking my head. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who finally learned when to let go. Over the next week, life became a blur of interviews, police updates, and quiet reflection. Everett Hale's arrest had opened a floodgate. Law enforcement discovered he was part of a regional network that targeted heirlooms, relics, and private collections across several southern states. Mason's name even surfaced in the investigation, though he was nowhere to be found. It turned out Everett had been working with people who knew how to manipulate sentiment, using emotional leverage to access private estates. The museum reached out again a few days later. Miss Armitage wanted to host a small private ceremony in honor of the Ellsworth women and their contribution to preserving Southern history. I wasn't sure I deserved such recognition, but she insisted. "You didn't just donate an artifact," she said over the phone. "You donated an idea that legacy should be shared, not exploited." So, a week later, we found ourselves back at the museum, not as visitors or witnesses this time, but as honored guests. The exhibit had grown since our last visit. The pearls now sat in the center of a larger display, surrounded by new photos, articles, and even a short plaque about the incident. Above it all, in elegant gold lettering, were the words, "The Pearl Legacy, a story of strength, forgiveness, and family. When Miss Pearl exceed in my fright." Armitage presented us to the small crowd. Her voice carried a quiet reverence. "This isn't a story about theft," she said. "It's a story about love, a mother's love strong enough to protect what truly mattered." These pearls remind us that heritage is not measured in price, but in principle. Brielle stood beside me, holding my hand. I could feel her shaking slightly, not from nerves but from emotion. When Miss Armitage handed her the microphone, she hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I'm not proud of everything I've done," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "I made choices that hurt the person I love most. But my mom never gave up on me, even when I didn't deserve forgiveness. She taught me that what we inherit isn't always material, it's moral. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to that." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when she finished. I hugged her tightly as the small crowd clapped softly. In that moment, I felt something inside me mend like a wound that had finally scarred over. After the ceremony, the museum gifted us a framed replica of the exhibit inscription. It read, "Some treasures belong not to one person but to everyone who remembers." I hung it in my studio later that evening, right above my workbench. Every time I looked at it, I felt grounded again. Brielle, in her own way, began to heal too. She started volunteering at the museum on weekends, helping with educational programs for children. Watching her explain history to curious kids, I saw pieces of the woman she was becoming, a version of herself that understood humility and purpose. She even used her social media accounts, once filled with materialistic posts, to share stories about art, legacy, and personal growth. Her caption on one photo of the exhibit read, "Some mistakes break you, others rebuild you." That single post went viral. Messages poured in from people all over the country, daughters who'd fought with mothers, mothers who'd been estranged from their children, families trying to reconnect. One evening, as we prepared dinner together, Brielle turned to me and said, "You know, maybe this whole thing was meant to happen. Maybe the pearls had to leave our hands to find their real purpose." I smiled, stirring the pot on the stove. "Maybe you're right. Maybe they were just waiting for the right eyes to see them." Over the next few months, I poured my emotions into my work. I started a new jewelry line called Resilient Threads, inspired by the pearls and the lessons they'd carried. Each piece had a story engraved on a small tag, words about strength, motherhood, and forgiveness. I wanted every woman who wore one to feel seen. Brielle helped with everything: design concepts, marketing, even modeling some of the pieces. She was finally using her talent for something meaningful. When the first collection launched, it sold out within weeks. But it wasn't the sales that made me proud, it was seeing her confidence rebuilt, this time rooted in purpose instead of approval. We were both growing again, side by side, like old roots finding new soil. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset when the mail carrier dropped a small envelope in our box. I wasn't expecting anything, but curiosity got the better of me. When I saw the sender's name, my heart skipped. It was postmarked from a correctional facility in South Carolina, and the name on the envelope was Mason Caldwell. For a long time, I just held it, staring at the faded ink of his handwriting. My instinct was to toss it straight into the trash. But something made me pause. Brielle was inside cooking dinner, humming softly to herself. She didn't need this darkness creeping back into her life. Still, I couldn't ignore it. My hands trembled as I tore the envelope open. The letter inside was brief, written in uneven script. Janessa, I was wrong. Everett and I were part of something I didn't understand until it was too late. You were right to protect what mattered, but not all of them were caught. Be careful. The last sentence made my stomach drop. Not all of them were caught. I folded the letter carefully, staring out at the horizon as the light faded. The sky turned a deep, bruised orange, the color of endings that don't quite feel finished. Just when life feels peaceful again, I receive a letter postmarked from prison with Mason's name on it. I hesitate for days before opening Mason's letter. At first, I tucked it inside a drawer in my studio, telling myself I'd throw it away later. But each time I passed that drawer, I felt its weight, as if the paper itself was whispering unfinished truths. Curiosity and dread battled inside me until, finally, one sleepless night, I gave in. I unfolded the letter beneath the dim light of my desk lamp, my hands trembling. The words were short, uneven, and desperate. Mason's handwriting was rushed, slanted, almost panicked. Janessa, you were right about everything. I didn't see who Everett really was until it was too late. He wasn't just stealing jewelry, he was working with others, people worse than him. They wanted the pearls for more than money. I'm sorry for what I did to you and Brielle, but be careful. Not all of them were caught. They know where you live. I reread the last sentence again and again, the words burning into my mind. They know where you live. My throat went dry. I didn't want to believe him, not after all the damage he'd caused. But something in his tone, fear, maybe made me pause. Mason had always been selfish, but not stupid. If he was warning me, then something was real enough to scare him. I stared out the window, watching the moon cast long shadows over the yard. My first instinct was to protect Brielle. She'd just started to rebuild herself to find purpose again. I couldn't let her world crumble because of Mason's ghost. But I also knew I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I told her. She was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when I slid the letter across the table. He wrote to me, I said quietly. From prison. Her eyes widened. What? Why? To warn us, I replied. He says Everett wasn't working alone. Her face drained of color. You think that's true? I sighed. I don't know, but I can't take chances. She read the letter silently, her fingers trembling. Mom. He says they know where we live. I know, I said, softly. We'll take precautions. I'll call Miss Armitage. We'll make sure the pearls are safe. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with museum security and local police. They promised to heighten surveillance and double-check their systems, but I could hear the hesitation in their voices. They'd already caught Everett, surely it was over, but my gut told me otherwise. That night, the air felt heavy again. I couldn't sleep. Every sound magnified. The house creaked. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and I lay there, listening, waiting. Around 2 a.m., a car engine rumbled faintly outside, idling for a few moments before driving away. I told myself it was nothing, but sleep never came. The following morning, Brielle found me in the kitchen, bleary-eyed and tense. You didn't sleep, did you? She asked. I shook my head. No, but it's fine. I called the museum director. They're moving the pearls into the secure vault for a few days, just as a precaution. Do you think someone's actually after them again? I don't know, I admitted, but it's better to be careful. We spent the day together, running errands, trying to act normal. But an unease lingered between us, like the quiet hum of something unseen. Every passing car made me tense. Every unfamiliar face seemed suspicious. That evening, I got another call from Miss Armitage. "The pearls are in the vault," she confirmed. "Only the director and I have access codes. There's no reason to worry." Her reassurance should have helped, but it didn't. I'd learned that danger rarely announces itself. It moves quietly until it's already inside. After dinner, Brielle and I sat on the porch, sipping tea in silence. The sky was streaked with pink and violet, the air cool and still. "Mom," she said suddenly, "what if this never really ends? What if people keep coming after them?" I looked at her, seeing the worry in her eyes, the same fear I'd been trying to hide. "Then we face it," I said firmly. "Together, we've already survived worse." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a brief moment, I believed that peace was possible. But fate wasn't done testing us yet. The next day passed uneventfully. I worked on new jewelry designs, while Brielle met with the museum staff to help organize a youth program. We were starting to feel normal again, almost happy. That night, as I locked the front door, a strange calm filled the house. The storm had passed, I thought. Finally. But just as I was settling into bed, my phone buzzed. A news alert. I reached for it, expecting something trivial, maybe a weather warning. Instead, the headline made my stomach twist. "Savannah History Museum Vault Alarm Triggered Police Investigating Possible Break-In." For a moment, I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, and my mind went blank. Then I bolted upright, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone, dialing Miss Armitage's number with trembling hands. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. "Mom?" Brielle's sleepy voice came from the hallway. She was rubbing her eyes, her expression turning to panic as she saw my face. "What's wrong?" "The museum," I whispered. The vault alarm went off. Her eyes widened. "The pearls?" "I don't know." We stood there in the middle of the living room, both of us frozen in fear. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the creak of the floor beneath us. Everything else was still too still. I felt that same ache in my chest that I had the day I discovered the pearls missing from my jewelry box. Only this time, the stakes were far greater. This wasn't just about legacy anymore, it was about whether history itself could be stolen twice. I grabbed my keys and purse, ready to go. But Brielle caught my arm. "Wait," she said. "We should call the police first." "I already did," I replied. "They're on their way. But I need to see it with my own eyes." She didn't argue. She just nodded, her face pale but resolute. We stepped outside into the cool night air, our headlights slicing through the dark as we drove toward the museum. And as the sirens echoed faintly in the distance, I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. But when I checked the news that night, I see that the museum's vault alarm had been triggered. The museum had been broken into, but not a single item was missing. When Brielle and I arrived, flashing red and blue lights painted the night in fractured color. Police cars crowded the entrance, and the air buzzed with tension. Officers moved quickly, their radios crackling with static. I parked a few blocks away and ran toward the museum doors, my pulse pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. A uniformed officer stopped me at the entrance. "Ma'am, this area's restricted." "I'm Janessa Ellsworth," I said, breathless. "The pearls, they're mine. Please, I just need to know if they're safe." Recognition flickered across his face. He hesitated before nodding. "They're secure, ma'am. Nothing was stolen." I nearly collapsed with relief, gripping Brielle's arm for balance. "Thank God," I whispered. Inside, the scene was chaos. The polished marble floors that once reflected peace were now littered with evidence markers and tape. Miss Armitage stood near the entrance of the vault hall, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. She rushed over as soon as she saw us. "Janessa," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to explain this." They tried, but they failed. The heavy steel door stood ajar, the digital lock pried open, the keypad scorched as if someone had tried to override it. Inside, the pearls sat untouched in their glass case. The sight made my knees weak. They looked almost defiant, gleaming softly under the emergency lights, as if daring anyone to take them. The security footage caught two intruders, Miss Armitage continued. Both masked. They used professional equipment, thermal cutters, motion inhibitors. They knew what they were doing. But something scared them off before they reached the pearls. What do you mean, scared them off? I asked. She frowned. We don't know yet. The footage cuts out for exactly 47 seconds, and when it comes back, the room is empty. Brielle's hand found mine. Mom, that's impossible. The vault's on lockdown during an alarm. They couldn't just vanish. I know, I whispered. But maybe fate decided enough was enough. The police questioned us for hours, asking about Mason, Everett, and the warnings in his letter. By dawn, the building was quiet again. The investigators promised to run fingerprints and trace the tools left behind, but a gnawing unease remained. If they hadn't been caught tonight, what would stop them from trying again? As the first light of morning filtered through the high museum windows, I walked over to the display. My reflection shimmered across the glass, tired eyes, messy hair, and behind me, Brielle watching silently. The pearls glowed faintly, each orb catching the dawn like tiny moons. I reached out, placing my palm flat against the glass. You've survived everything, I murmured. War, grief, greed, and now this. Maybe that's your real legacy. Brielle stepped closer. I think Grandma's watching over them, she said softly. Over us. I smiled faintly. I like to think so. Miss Armitage approached, her expression softening. They're moving the entire collection to a secondary facility until we finish repairs, she said. But I promise you, they'll remain under maximum security. I nodded, exhausted but grateful. Thank you. You've done more than I could have hoped. As we left the museum, the morning air felt crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. The city was just waking up, unaware of how close history had come to being stolen again. That evening, Brielle and I sat on the porch in silence. She leaned her head on my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think this is really over? I looked out at the horizon, watching the fading light paint the sky gold. I think the danger's past, I said slowly. But stories like ours don't really end, they just become lessons. A week later, the police called. They'd identified one of the intruders through partial prints, an associate of Everett's from Charleston. The other remained unknown. But what struck me most was what the officer said next. They claim they weren't alone, ma'am. Someone on the inside may have helped them bypass initial security. I froze. Inside the museum? Yes, but we're still investigating. That revelation chilled me more than anything else. It meant trust once again had been misplaced. Even institutions meant to preserve truth weren't immune to corruption. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into my studio, staring at the framed inscription from the museum. Some treasures belong not to one person, but to everyone who remembers. Those words had once felt powerful. Now, they felt fragile. I thought of my mother again, her gentle wisdom, her strength, and how she'd survived betrayals of her own. She'd always said, Janessa, some lessons don't end with you. They echo. Maybe this was one of those echoes. The next morning, Brielle suggested we visit the museum once more before the pearls were moved to their temporary location. I just want to say goodbye properly, she said. So we did. The staff let us in early, before opening hours. The hall was empty, the lights dimmed to a soft gold. The pearls sat there, silent and eternal, the faintest reflection of our faces glowing against the glass. Brielle pressed her hand next to mine. I'll never forget this, she said quietly. You don't have to, I replied. It's part of you now. Just like it's part of me. We stood there for a long time, mother and daughter, guardians of a story far bigger than ourselves. For once, the silence between us wasn't filled with regret, it was filled with peace. As we turned to leave, a police officer stationed near the entrance called out, You two have good timing. We're about to start moving the collection. I nodded, smiling faintly. We just wanted one last look. But as we stepped out into the sunlight, something caught my eye, a shadow of movement near the parking lot. A tall figure, wearing a hat, slipping between the trees. My breath hitched. I couldn't make out his face. But something about his gait, the tilt of his head, it was too familiar. "Mom?" Brielle asked, noticing my stillness. "It's nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. But my heart knew better. Some ghosts don't disappear. They linger, watching, waiting. That night, as I locked up the house, the feeling returned, that strange awareness of being observed. I went to the window, peering into the darkness. Nothing moved. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that someone, somewhere, still hadn't let go. Maybe Mason's warning hadn't been a final threat, maybe it had been a prophecy. And yet, as we leave the museum, a shadowed figure slips a white envelope under our car's windshield. Inside the envelope was a photograph of my mother wearing the pearls with a note. "The story isn't over." The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, familiar somehow, but I couldn't place it. My pulse quickened as I turned the photo over, half expecting to find more. But there was nothing else. Just that haunting line written in black ink, its message looping like an unfinished promise. Brielle stood beside me in the museum parking lot, staring at the note in silence. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the pavement, yet somehow, everything felt colder. "Mom," she whispered, "what does that mean?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "I don't know, but someone wants us to remember something, or maybe someone wants to remind us that legacies never really end." She frowned, fear flickering across her face. "Do you think it's Mason? Or someone connected to Everett?" I studied the handwriting again. It didn't look rushed or threatening. It felt intentional, poised. "No," I said finally. "This doesn't feel like a threat, it feels like a message." That night, after Brielle went to bed, I sat at my desk and stared at the photo for hours. My mother was young in it, no older than Brielle is now. Her smile was soft, serene, and the pearls glimmered at her throat like they were part of her. The background was unfamiliar, an old studio maybe. One I'd never seen before. It wasn't a photo I remembered us owning. That detail unnerved me the most. Who had it? And how did it end up under my windshield? Eventually, exhaustion pulled me to sleep right there at my desk. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the blinds, washing away the darkness that had settled the night before. The photo lay beside me, and somehow, it didn't feel ominous anymore. It felt purposeful, like my mother's way of telling me the story had reached the right ending. When Brielle came down for breakfast, her energy was different, lighter, more at peace. "I was thinking," she said as she poured coffee, "maybe we should write about everything that happened. Not just for us, but for other people. You know, families like ours who've lost things, relationships, trust, meaning, and need a reminder that it can be rebuilt." Her suggestion caught me off guard, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. "A book?" I asked. She nodded, smiling. "A memoir. The Pearl Legacy, maybe. You tell your story, and I'll tell mine. 2 perspectives. 2 generations," I laughed softly. "You always did have a flair for titles. And you always said words carry power," she said. "So let's use them." That day marked the start of something new. We began drafting the outline together at the kitchen table, the same place where so much had been broken and repaired between us. I wrote about my mother. Brielle wrote about guilt and forgiveness, about what it meant to grow up in the shadow of someone else's pain and still find her own light. Every page we filled seemed to stitch our wounds a little tighter. The museum supported the idea wholeheartedly. Miss Armitage even arranged a book launch event to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of the exhibit. By the time autumn rolled around, our story was ready, a tale of love, loss, legacy, and redemption. The day of the launch, the museum buzzed with people. Visitors wandered the halls, pausing by the glass case where the pearls now rested permanently in the center of the main gallery. The display had expanded new photos, clippings, and a small screen looping our interview played quietly in the background. Above the case, engraved on a bronze plaque, were the words I'd written months ago. Some treasures belong to everyone. As I stood there beside Brielle, listening to the soft murmur of visitors reading the inscription aloud, I felt a deep, quiet joy. We had done it. We had turned pain into legacy just as my mother always said pearls did. A reporter from the local paper approached us for a few words. "What do the pearls mean to you now, after everything that's happened?" she asked. I smiled thoughtfully. "They mean we endured. That beauty can come from pain, and that love, even when tested, can survive," Brielle added softly. "They're not just our story anymore. They belong to everyone who's ever learned to forgive." Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening light dimmed through the high museum windows, I wandered back to the display one last time. The pearls gleamed softly under the light, and for a moment, I imagined my mother standing there beside me, her gentle presence calm and steady. "Mom," I whispered. "We did it." Brielle appeared at my side, slipping her hand into mine. "Do you ever think she knew all this would happen?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe not the details, but I think she knew that lessons don't end with the person who learns them. They keep living on, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart." Outside, the museum courtyard glowed under strings of soft lights. Guests laughed, music played, and for the first time in years, everything felt whole again. The shadows that had followed us, Mason, Everett, the fear, they all felt like distant ghosts now, fading into the past. As we prepared to leave, Brielle stopped at the door, turning to look back at the pearls one more time. "You know," she said, smiling gently, "I think Grandma was right all along." "About what?" I asked. She squeezed my hand. "That pearls are born from pain, but the ones who wear them decide what that pain becomes." I felt tears rise but didn't fight them. "Then I guess we turned ours into something beautiful." We stepped out into the cool savannah night, the sound of crickets filling the quiet. I glanced up at the museum's illuminated sign, proud and serene against the dark sky. The photo of my mother. The note, it all made sense now. The story wasn't over because legacy never ends. It simply changes hands, finding new voices to carry it forward. As we walked toward the car, I looked back one last time at the museum's glowing windows. The pearls shimmered faintly inside, eternal as the moonlight that bathed them. And in that light, I felt my mother's presence not as a ghost, but as part of me. Part of Brielle. Part of every woman who's ever learned that strength isn't in what you keep, it's in what you're brave enough to share. And as I look at the pearls gleaming softly behind the glass, I know their light and our bond will never fade.